It was just another birthday, until it wasn't. You know, I've always loved my birthday, not for the cake or the gifts, but for the way my husband always made it feel personal, thoughtful, like the world slowed down for just one day, to remind me I was loved. One year it was a candlelit dinner in Venice. Another, a handwritten letter folded inside a tiny jewelry box. He was good at this, really good. So when he started acting a little off a few days before my birthday, I figured, okay, he's cooking something up again. Maybe a surprise weekend. Getaway or a hidden reservation at that place I've been dying to try. But this year would be different. Not just different, defining. I remember waking up that morning with the usual kind of excitement. The kind that hums quietly under the surface, like you know something special is coming even if you don't know what. He kissed me and whispered, "Happy birthday." But there was something in his eyes. A glimmer. Mischief, maybe. Or something. Deeper. Have you ever sensed that something big was coming even before it arrived? That quiet moment before a storm. Not a violent one, but the kind that sweeps through and changes everything. That was my birthday this year, and I had no idea that a simple surprise would lead to a moment that would shift the very foundation of our relationship and show me sides of love, trust, and intimacy I'd never dared imagine before. The look in his eyes said it all. That morning, he looked at me differently. It wasn't the usual sleepy smile or playful nudge. It was something quieter, more loaded, like he was holding on to a secret that was both thrilling and terrifying. Leaned in, kissed my forehead and whispered, "Tonight's going to be special, you'll see." That's all he said. No hints, no clues. Just that look. The one that lingers a second too long, the kind that makes you feel like the answer is, in the silence, not the words. All day my mind wandered. Was it a romantic dinner? A last-minute trip? Something intimate like the time he recreated our first date down to the exact bottle of wine? By evening, curiosity had completely taken over. I chose a dress I hadn't worn in years. Not too much. Just enough. The kind of dress that makes you feel like you're stepping into your own power. I didn't know what he had planned, but I knew I wanted to feel beautiful for it. And then the doorbell rang. Naturally, I thought it was a delivery, or maybe a surprise bouquet, but when I opened the door, it wasn't flowers. It was him, my husband's best friend. We'd known each other for years. Family holidays, game nights, always respectful, always friendly. But never anything charged until now. He stood there with a calm, knowing smile, as if he knew something I didn't. My husband greeted him warmly, too warmly to be unplanned. In that moment, everything I thought I understood about the evening shifted, and the question that hit me hardest wasn't, "What's going on?" It was, "Do I trust where this is leading?" The room changed before I even realized it. The lights were dimmed, soft music played in the background, slow, sensual, deliberate. And candles. Dozens of them casting warm shadows across the living room. The air felt thick, not with smoke or scent, but with something deeper. Expectation, you know that feeling. When you walk into a space and the energy hits you before the people do? That's what it was like. Like the room had its own pulse, and it had just started to beat faster. My husband reached for my hand and pulled me gently toward him. His touch wasn't hurried, but it wasn't casual either. It was charged. His eyes searched mine, not for permission, but for presence. As if he wanted to know if I was really there in the moment, feeling what he was feeling. And I was. Behind him, his best friend sat on the edge of the couch. Calm, silent, watching, not in a predatory way, but with curiosity. Like he too was part of this unfolding script, but hadn't spoken his first line yet. It should have felt strange, but it didn't. Instead, I felt a spark of something I hadn't expected. Intrigue. Not fear, not discomfort. Just a quiet, growing awareness that something was about to happen, something we hadn't talked about, something we hadn't prepared for, but something I wasn't entirely against. I didn't move, I didn't speak. I just stood there, heart pounding, breath shallow, letting the moment tell me who I was about to become. I knew what was about to happen and I didn't say no. There's a moment just before clarity hits when everything slows down. Your heart beats louder than the music. The flicker of candlelight feels too steady, too knowing. And suddenly, silence isn't empty. It's full of understanding. That was the moment I knew. I knew what this was, what they had planned. And the wildest part? I didn't flinch. My husband pulled me closer, his breath warm against my ear, his hands more daring now. But I wasn't watching him, not entirely. I was watching both of them, and the way they looked at me, like I was the center of something. They both already agreed on, made my skin flush with anticipation. We never talked about this. There had been no what-if conversations, no confessions. But somehow, I knew. And more than that, I trusted it. I trusted him. And in some strange, unexpected way, I trusted his best friend too. Isn't that what intimacy is at its core? Not just love, not just desire, but a sacred kind of yes. The kind that comes not from pressure, but from presence. In that room, nothing felt forced. It wasn't about crossing lines. It was about opening a door I didn't know I had the key to, so I didn't resist. I didn't ask for more explanation. I let the moment unfold, raw, electric, and deeply real. And in doing so, I discovered something I didn't know I'd been searching for. The freedom to want, and the courage to allow it. It wasn't just physical, it was sacred. There's something different about moments that unfold without a script. No one rushed, no one asked, "What now?" Everything just flowed, like it had always meant to happen this way. Their touches weren't aggressive, they were intentional, measured, almost reverent, like they weren't just touching a body. They were learning a language they'd never spoken, but somehow understood instinctively. And for the first time in a long time, I felt worshipped. Not for how I looked, not for what I gave, but simply ever existing, in that space, in that skin, in that breathless electric now. Have you ever felt that? That overwhelming sense of being seen, not just with eyes, but with presence? There was no jealousy, no competition, just a strange, magnetic symmetry. Like each of them knew exactly when to move closer, when to pull back, as if they'd rehearsed. But I knew they hadn't. It was more than physical, it was intuitive, emotional, alive. And when it ended, when the last breath softened into silence, I found myself lying between them, skin still warm, heart steady. For the first time in what felt like years, none of us spoke, because there was nothing left to say. Not every connection needs a label. Some just happen. And sometimes, those are the ones that stay with you the longest. The quiet morning that asked a louder question. The next morning was quiet, not awkward, not heavy, just still. The kind of stillness that doesn't beg to be filled. His friend had already left by the time I came into the kitchen. No note, no goodbye. And maybe that was the point. Some things speak loudest when they're left unspoken. My husband stood by the stove barefoot, making coffee like any other morning. The way he poured the cream, stirred it in, handed me my cup. It was all so normal. And yet, nothing about me felt normal. I wasn't confused, I wasn't ashamed. What I felt was more complex than that. It was fullness. A strange, deep sense of being held, not just by arms the night before, but by a truth that was bigger than any label. He didn't bring it up. Not the candles, not the tension, not the three of us tangled up in something both physical and emotional. And maybe he didn't need to, because I could feel it in the way he looked at me, like we were carrying a new kind of intimacy now. One, that didn't need explanation. But still, one question echoed underneath all the quiet. Was that night a beautiful exception, or the beginning of something neither of us expected to want again? The question he didn't ask, until he did. It was almost a week later. We were curled up on the couch like any other night. Netflix low in the background, my feet tucked beneath his legs, a glass of red wine resting on the armrest, untouched. We hadn't spoken about that night since it happened. Not directly. but it lingered like a scent on your skin that stays long after the fire has gone out. He reached for my hand, looked at me in that quiet way he does when he's searching for more than just an answer, and then he said it, soft, steady. "Have you thought about doing it again?" I didn't pretend I hadn't, because I had. Not obsessively, not every moment, but often enough that the memory had started to feel less like a memory and more like a door still slightly open. I looked at him, not surprised, not nervous, just ready to be honest. "Yeah," I said. "I've thought about it." He nodded, slowly, then paused like he was making space for the truth to land. "I talked to him," he said. "No need to ask who. He's open to it if you are." And there it was. The quiet confirmation that this wasn't a spark we had to bury. It could be explored again, but this time it with eyes wide open. This time it wasn't for a birthday. There's a quiet kind of thrill that comes right after a decision is made, especially when it's the kind of decision that breaks routine, stretches boundaries, and whispers, "You're not who you used to be." And maybe that's a good thing. I said yes, not out of curiosity, not to please him, but because deep down, somewhere between fear and fascination, I realized I wanted this too. This time, there was no excuse of candles or celebration. No birthday to hide behind. Just us, clear-eyed, intentional. Walking into something not for novelty, man, but for discovery. And strangely, that made it even more intimate. We talked about details, not awkwardly, but gently, like people who've been through a storm and are choosing to step back into the rain, together. What time, where, how it should feel, what we were open to and what we weren't. And with every step I felt something shift in me. Not in a dramatic movie scene kind of way, but like the quiet unfolding of a part of myself I didn't know had been waiting to be invited out. There was nervousness, sure, but beneath it, something steadier, excitement, anticipation, and maybe even a kind of peace. Because this time it wasn't a surprise. It was a choice. When familiarity becomes freedom, the second time felt is different, not because it was more daring, not because we pushed new boundaries, but because it felt familiar, like coming home to a version of ourselves we hadn't yet fully met, but somehow already trusted. There was no tension, no glances asking, "Is this okay?" No need to decode body language or second-guess intentions. We knew. We moved differently this time, more fluid, more attuned, like the choreography had been written in the spaces between our last goodbye and this quiet hello. And strangely, beautifully, there was no rush. We weren't performing. We weren't chasing intensity. We were simply allowing it to rise in its own time, on its own terms. And because of that, it came stronger, deeper, truer. Afterward, as I lay between them again, this time without the shock or novelty, I felt something settle inside me. A calm. Not the kind that whispers, "That was enough," but the kind that says, "This belongs." It no longer felt like a break from the norm. It was the norm now, not in a loud, rule-breaking way, but in the quiet recognition that intimacy can take many forms, and sometimes the form it chooses surprises even the people who are brave enough to hold it. It was never just about the night. By the time the second night faded into morning, something had quietly shifted, not in a dramatic, life-altering way, but in the subtle, steady way seasons change. You don't always notice it happening, but one day you wake up, and the air feels different. This wasn't just a one-time spark anymore, not a wild exception, not a secret memory to box up and store away. It had become something else, a thread now woven into the fabric of who we were becoming, and strangely, beautifully, I welcomed it. What began as a surprise had turned into a mirror, one that showed me parts of myself I didn't even know I'd been hiding, desires I didn't know I could name, trust I didn't know I had, because this wasn't about rebellion or thrill for the sake of thrill. It was about redefining closeness, about choosing honesty, even when it's complex, about seeing love not as a fixed structure, but as something living, capable of evolving when you do. And maybe that's the real gift, not the night itself, but the permission to ask, what else could love look like if we stopped being afraid to ask for more of it? For those quiet questions we all carry. Maybe you've never lived a night like that. Maybe you never will, but maybe, just maybe, you've had your own version of it. A moment that gently asked you to become more honest. With yourself. With your partner. With the story you thought you were writing. Love isn't always loud. It doesn't always come with labels or scripts or guarantees. Sometimes it's quiet, unfolding in the space between what we were taught to want and what our hearts quietly whisper when the lights go out. So tell me, have you ever experienced a love that surprised you, that softened your edges, that asked you to see trust as something more than comfort? Drop your thoughts in the comments. No judgment here, just curiosity. Because the truth is, we're all just trying to figure out what love looks like. When we finally stop pretending, we've already figured it out. And if this story made you feel something, subscribe, share, or simply sit with it a little longer. Not everything beautiful needs to be explained. Some things just want to be felt.